Let's explore this topic with Dr. Fred Muhumuza. He's a development policy analyst and a lecturer at the School of Economics at Makerere University. Thank you for your time this evening, Dr. Muhumuza. So let's start with last November. The Finance Ministry saying it would cut external borrowing by over 90% in the fiscal year starting in July, and it would only borrow around $8.2 million. 4 months on, do you think that's still a viable target?
Yeah, thank you very much. Fred Muhumuza here, as I've indicated, from the Makerere University Business School. The target, I think, has already been passed. Within the domestic market, the government intended to borrow just about 8.9 trillion shillings. That's possibly close to $3 or $2.5 billion. But by February, which is still 4 months away from the end of the financial year, which ends in June, the government had already borrowed 14.6 trillion shillings. That is almost 60%, closer to 80% of what it had intended to borrow for the whole year. So from 8.9 trillion shillings, by February, government had already borrowed 14.6 trillion shillings. So I think the target is already surpassed, and we are going to see more since the financial year is yet to close, and there are quite a number of other demands on the government budget.
So last year, the IMF pointed out that, while current public debt loads are sustainable, low tax revenues, right, do constrain Uganda's fiscal policy space. And at 12.5% of GDP, at least according to OECD data, it's essentially under the average, right, among peer economies in sub-Saharan Africa. Is there room to raise that ratio? And if so, how?
It's difficult to raise that ratio because we've been on that ratio for almost 2 decades. Every time we try to raise it, we promise we'll increase that ratio by 0.5% per year. It seems to stagnate at that level. So I don't see it going up, and the reasons are quite many. One is Uganda has a lot of tax exemptions, but also the businesses in Uganda haven't been doing well, that many of them are unable to pay taxes. We've also seen businesses collapse. Global businesses have closed and left. So there are quite a number of sticky conditions within the economy that cannot allow our revenues to go above that limit of 12% of GDP or 13% literally of GDP.
Indeed. So just looping back to some of the numbers that we mentioned a little earlier, that high growth rate that we see in GDP numbers, right? Like the forecast for this year is in between 6 and 6.5%. That's not translating into meaningfully higher real wages, right, and disposable income at household level or at business level, is it?
No, it is not. Really, Uganda, sometimes we argue we should not be comparing ourselves with others because we have our own unique conditions. So we might be 6%, and one might say we are one of the fastest growing economies in the world. But we cannot forget that we have a very high population growth rate of almost 3%, which other countries may not be having. We have a lot of burdens, the debt to pay for. So we have set up our target. We want to grow the economy by 10 times over the next 15 years. Now that to many people means Uganda must be growing at 13% per year. So 6% may look good for other countries, but certainly not for Uganda's target and goals.
Indeed. One last question for you. Back to the composition, right, of tax revenues that we spoke about a little earlier. Corporate income taxes made up just 8% of Uganda's tax revenues, and elsewhere on the continent the number is usually around 20-25%, sometimes slightly higher. What explains that comparatively low ratio in Uganda?
2 big reasons really. Many corporations in Uganda are not able to make sufficient profits because that corporation tax is really on profits, and we don't have many companies making significant profits. Some people think the companies are not telling the truth, they are hiding their figures. But that is for a fact that not many companies are making the profits. But also I've had quite a number of exemptions on some of the companies that actually do make the profits. Now, the last time I checked Uganda's tax revenue data, it was clear that 70 to 75% of the tax collection in Uganda is coming from just about 1,000 companies. Now, that gives you the magnitude of this very small number of companies that are even in the first place contributing towards tax collection. It's not that they are the ones paying the taxes, like the telecom companies will pick it from me when I buy data, when I talk on airtime. But that also shows you how many companies are actually engaged in the formal sector, that they can be driving the business that is taxable and they're actually paying the taxes. Only 1,000 out of a tax register of over 2 million entities. So that's quite a small number, and shouldn't be a surprise that only that small percentage is coming from corporation tax.
Indeed, it's been an interesting conversation. Thank you very much for